Ambassador Minji stepped off the transport shuttle and took her first breath of recycled station air. After 23 years of service to Earth, she had finally received the invitation that every diplomat dreamed of. The Galactic Council wanted to meet with humanity. This was it. This was Earth's chance to join the greater universe as equals, not as some backward species that had just figured out faster-than-light travel. She wasn't alone on this journey. Jaiwoo, her assistant for the past 8 years, walked beside her carrying data tablets filled with Earth's proposals and cultural information. Behind them, Taeyong, the security officer, kept his eyes moving constantly. He didn't trust aliens, and honestly Minji couldn't blame him. Humans had only known about extraterrestrial life for 15 years. Everything was still new and uncertain. The station called Nexus Prime was massive beyond imagination. It floated in neutral space, belonging to no single species but serving as the meeting ground for the 7 most powerful civilizations in this part of the galaxy. The corridors stretched for miles, filled with beings that looked like they had walked straight out of Earth's wildest science fiction stories. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few didn't even have recognizable faces. The Galactic Council itself was intimidating. 7 species who had been traveling the stars for thousands of years before humans even invented the wheel. They sat in a semicircle, elevated above where Minji would present Earth's case. Their translator devices hummed softly, converting her Korean into languages she couldn't even pronounce. The first few weeks were brutal. Every proposal Minji made was met with polite dismissals or condescending smiles. The council members treated her like a child presenting a school project. They questioned everything about humanity. Why did humans still have separate nations? Why did Earth still experience conflicts and wars? Why should the council waste time on such a primitive species? But Minji didn't give up. She had faced difficult negotiations before. She had brokered peace deals between countries that had been enemies for generations. She knew patience was her greatest weapon. So she listened to their concerns, acknowledged their points, and slowly, carefully began to earn their respect. Jaiwoo worked tirelessly behind the scenes, researching each council member's species and their histories. She found common ground between human culture and alien traditions. She discovered which council members might be sympathetic to Earth's case and which ones would always oppose them. By the 3rd month, progress started to show. 2 council members, representatives of smaller civilizations, began supporting some of Minji's proposals. They saw something in humanity that the others missed. Perhaps they remembered when their own species had been young and eager to prove themselves. But not everyone was happy about Earth's growing influence. The Vorgoth Empire controlled the Council's military forces and security operations. They had held that position for 600 years, and they weren't interested in competition. Their ambassador, a massive creature named Rylok with 4 arms and eyes that glowed red in dim light, made his feelings clear at every opportunity. Rylok spoke openly about how humans were dangerous. He pointed to Earth's history of warfare and violence. He reminded the Council that humanity had nearly destroyed itself with nuclear weapons just decades ago. How could such a species be trusted with access to galactic technology and knowledge? Minji countered every argument professionally, but she could feel the hostility radiating from Rylok. This wasn't just political opposition. This was personal hatred for her and everything Earth represented. Then, during her 6th month at Nexus Prime, Jaiwoo discovered something that changed everything. While researching Vorgoth trade routes for a completely unrelated proposal, she stumbled across encrypted communications. With help from Taeyong, who had military intelligence training, they managed to decrypt small portions of the files. What they found was horrifying. The Vorgoth Empire had been systematically destroying a smaller species called the Panari. Not through open warfare but through economic manipulation and targeted violence that looked like accidents. The Panari were slowly being erased from existence, and the Galactic Council either didn't know or didn't care. Minji spent 3 sleepless nights deciding what to do. She could ignore the information and focus on Earth's admission to the Council. That was her primary mission. Earth had sent her here to secure humanity's future, not to fight battles for unknown alien species. But she couldn't do it. She couldn't look at those files showing innocent beings murdered and destroyed, then go back to making pleasant diplomatic conversation. That wasn't why she had become a diplomat. She had dedicated her life to standing up for those who couldn't defend themselves. She told Jaiwoo and Taeyong her decision. She would present the evidence to the full council at the next assembly meeting in 2 days. Jaiwoo looked worried but nodded her support. Taeyong was more direct in his concern. He pulled Minji aside and spoke quietly but firmly. Ambassador, the Vorgoth won't let this go. They'll see this as a declaration of war against their interests. We're 3 humans on a station controlled by their security forces. If they decide to silence us, we have no backup and no way home." Minji met his eyes and smiled sadly. "I know, Taeyang. I know the risks. But if we stay silent about atrocities just to protect ourselves, then we don't deserve a seat at that council table. Earth needs to join the galaxy as a species with principles, not as cowards who look away from murder." Taeyang didn't argue further. He just nodded and began making security preparations for the next 2 days. Minji didn't sleep that night. She reviewed the evidence again and again, preparing her presentation. She thought about Earth, about her family back home, about the billions of humans counting on her to succeed. She was about to risk everything humanity had worked for. But some things mattered more than safety. Some things mattered more than success. Justice was one of those things. The explosion came on the last night before her scheduled presentation. Minji was in her quarters making final revisions to her speech. Jaiwo was in the room next door. Taeyang was on patrol in the corridor outside. The blast tore through the entire diplomatic section of the station. Security footage would later show the fireball expanding through 3 levels, consuming everything in its path. There were no survivors in that section. Not Minji, not Jaiwo, not Taeyang, not any of the 8 other Earth delegation members who had been sleeping or working nearby. Within an hour, Rylok appeared before the council with a prepared statement. A terrible accident had occurred. Human equipment, not properly calibrated for the station's power systems, had malfunctioned catastrophically. The Vorgoth Empire extended its deepest sympathies to Earth for this tragic loss. The other council members accepted this explanation without question. After all, humans were new to space travel. These kinds of accidents happen with primitive technology. The matter was closed before Earth's government even received notification that their ambassador was dead. But back on Earth, when Admiral Juno saw the security footage and read the official report, he knew exactly what he was looking at. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. And someone was going to pay for it. The video call came through at 3 in the morning, Earth Standard Time. Admiral Juno was already awake, staring at reports from the outer colonies, when his assistant patched through the emergency communication from Nexus Prime. The moment he saw the Galactic Council's official seal, his stomach dropped. Nothing good ever came through official channels at this hour. The message was brief and cold. There had been an incident. The Earth delegation was gone. All 11 members, including Ambassador Minji. The Council expressed their sympathies and assured Earth that a full report would be provided within the standard review period of 90 days. Juno sat in silence for a long moment after the message ended. Minji had been more than just Earth's ambassador. They had grown up in the same neighborhood in Seoul. They had attended the same schools. When Juno joined the military and Minji pursued diplomacy, they had joked about how they were taking different paths to protect Earth. Now one of those paths had ended in an explosion on an alien station, and Juno was being told to wait 90 days for answers. He immediately requested the security footage from Nexus Prime. The Council took 4 days to respond, and when they did, they sent only a 30-second clip showing the explosion from a distant corridor camera. The quality was deliberately degraded. Juno had seen better footage from convenience store robberies. This wasn't transparency. This was a cover-up. Earth's government formally demanded a complete investigation with human observers present. The Galactic Council responded with a carefully worded letter explaining that such involvement would be inappropriate, as it might compromise the objectivity of their internal review process. They promised full cooperation and understanding, but their actions said something entirely different. Juno wasn't a diplomat like Minji had been. He was a military officer who had spent 30 years learning how to read tactical situations. And this situation was screaming one thing at him. Earth had just been tested and the galaxy was watching to see how humanity would respond. 2 weeks after the explosion, the Vorgoth Empire released their official findings. Ambassador Rylok himself appeared in a galactic broadcast, his 4 arms spread in a gesture that the translator software called sympathetic. He explained how human technology, primitive and poorly maintained, had caused a catastrophic power surge. He showed technical diagrams that meant nothing to most viewers but looked impressively official. He concluded by suggesting that perhaps Earth wasn't quite ready for galactic cooperation after all. The broadcast was carefully calculated. It wasn't just explaining away Minji's death. It was humiliating Earth in front of every species in the known galaxy. The message was clear. Humans were careless children who couldn't even keep their own equipment from exploding. How could such a species ever be trusted as equals? Back on Earth, the reaction was immediate and volcanic. Protests erupted in every major city. Millions of people took to the streets demanding justice for Minji and her team. They carried pictures of the deceased delegation members. They chanted slogans about galactic accountability. The anger wasn't just about 11 dead humans. It was about respect, about dignity, about whether humanity mattered at all in this vast universe. Juno watched the protests from his office window at Defense Command. He understood that anger because he felt it burning in his own chest. But anger alone wouldn't bring justice. The galaxy ran on power, not principles. If Earth wanted answers, Earth would need to prove it couldn't be dismissed so easily. He called a meeting with Earth's top military and intelligence leaders. 27 people gathered in a secure conference room deep underground. Juno got straight to the point. He displayed the evidence that Minji's team had been gathering before their deaths. Intelligence operatives had managed to recover fragments of data from the team's encrypted backups. It showed everything: the Vorgoth crimes against the Pinari species and, more importantly, communications suggesting that Rylock had known about Minji's investigation. "They killed our people to keep them silent," Juno said quietly. "And now they're trying to make us look like fools who can't handle basic technology. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" The debate lasted for 6 hours. Some argued for continued diplomatic pressure. They pointed out that Earth was still new to the galactic stage, still vulnerable. A military response could unite all the Council species against humanity. Earth would be crushed and possibly destroyed entirely. Better to accept this bitter lesson and move forward carefully. Others argued just as passionately that accepting this would doom Earth forever. If humanity didn't stand up now, every species in the galaxy would see them as weak. Earth would become a target for every civilization looking for easy resources or cheap labor. The only language that mattered in the universe was strength, and Earth needed to demonstrate that strength immediately. Juno listened to all of it, then he revealed something that only a handful of people in the room knew about. For 40 years since Earth had first detected alien signals and realized they weren't alone in the universe, humanity had been preparing for the worst-case scenario. While diplomats worked on peaceful contact, military scientists worked on something else entirely. Project Silent Thunder had been Earth's insurance policy. Hidden construction facilities scattered across the solar system, from Mars' orbit to the moons of Jupiter. Advanced stealth technology that made ships invisible to every known form of detection. Weapons systems that didn't just match alien technology but exceeded it in specific, carefully chosen ways. Humanity had spent 4 decades and trillions of dollars preparing for the possibility that first contact might go very, very wrong. The technology had never been deployed. Earth had desperately hoped they would never need it. But it existed and it was ready. "We built these systems because we knew we might face this exact situation," Juno explained. "A moment where diplomacy fails and we have to choose between accepting injustice or fighting back. The question isn't whether we have the capability. The question is whether we have the will." The vote wasn't immediate. People needed time to consider what they were really contemplating. This wasn't just military action. This was declaring, through violence if necessary, that Earth would not be pushed around. It was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But as the hours passed and people reviewed the evidence again and again, the conclusion became clear. Minji and her team had died trying to stand up for justice. They had died because they refused to ignore atrocities. If Earth backed down now, their deaths meant nothing. Their sacrifice would be remembered as a cautionary tale about what happens to humans who get too ambitious. The final vote was unanimous. Earth would respond, but not through diplomatic channels that had already proven useless. Earth would deliver a message in the only language that seemed to matter in galactic politics: action with consequences. Juno was given operational command. His orders were clear but terrifying in their implications. Make the Vorgoth Empire understand that killing humans carried a price. Make the Galactic Council understand that Earth would not be ignored or dismissed. And most importantly, make every species watching understand that humanity was not weak, was not helpless, and would not accept injustice silently. As the meeting ended and people filed out, Juno stayed behind in the empty conference room. He pulled up a photo of Minji from 20 years ago, both of them young and optimistic, celebrating her first successful negotiation between two feuding nations. "You wanted peace, old friend?" he whispered to the image. "You believed in doing things the right way through talk and understanding. But they didn't give you that chance. So now we do this my way. And I promise you, they will never forget what it costs to murder those who come in peace." He closed the file and began drafting operation orders. Earth's military machine, hidden and waiting for 40 years, was about to wake up. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The Vorgoth military outpost at Kepler 442 was considered one of the safest assignments in the Empire. Located at a strategic trade route intersection, the station housed 300 military personnel who spent their days monitoring commercial traffic and collecting tariffs. It was boring work but safe work. The kind of posting where soldiers grew comfortable and let their guard down. Commander Throck had been stationed there for 8 years. He liked the routine, the predictability. Every morning he reviewed the same reports, checked the same sensor readings, and filed the same status updates. The most exciting thing that had happened in the past year was when a cargo ship's navigation system malfunctioned and it drifted slightly off course. That was the level of action Kepler 442 saw. The station's defensive systems were top-tier Vorgoth technology, or at least they had been when installed 20 years ago. Throck had repeatedly requested upgrades, but Central Command always had the same response. Why waste resources on a station that never saw combat? The sensors could detect any ship within 10 million kilometers. The weapons could destroy any threat long before it got close. What more did he need? On the morning everything changed, Throck was reviewing supply requisitions and thinking about his upcoming retirement. He had 2 more years before he could return home to his family estate and never think about military service again. He was planning his garden when his sensor officer called out something strange. "Commander, I'm getting unusual readings in Sector 7. Could be a sensor glitch." Throck walked over to look at the display. There was a faint energy signature, appearing and disappearing randomly. Probably nothing. Space was full of natural phenomena that created odd readings. He was about to dismiss it when the signature vanished completely. "Run a diagnostic on that sensor array," he ordered. "Probably just needs recalibration." What Throck didn't know was that 6 Earth stealth ships had been positioned around his station for the past 6 days. They hung in the darkness of space like ghosts, their hulls absorbing every scan that touched them. The technology was something new, something the Vorgoth had never encountered. Quantum camouflage combined with zero-emission propulsion. The ships weren't just hard to detect. They were effectively invisible. Inside the lead ship, Captain Salmon checked her tactical display one final time. Every weapon system was charged and ready. Every crew member was at their station. She had reviewed the mission parameters 100 times. There would be no mistakes, no hesitation. Earth had given her a job to do, and she would do it perfectly. The authorization code came through from Admiral Juno himself, transmitted via encrypted quantum channel. 3 simple words: execute Operation Reckoning. Salmon took a deep breath and gave the order. All ships, begin attack sequence. Communications first. The first indication Throck had that something was wrong was when every communication system on the station went dead simultaneously. Not just offline but completely destroyed. The comm arrays that dotted the station's exterior simply ceased to exist, shredded by precisely targeted railgun fire that came from nowhere. Alarms started screaming throughout the station. Throck ran back to his command chair, trying to understand what was happening. The tactical display showed nothing. No ships, no energy signatures, no indication of any threat at all. Yet something was systematically destroying his station. "Defensive weapons, fire at Sector 7. Blind fire if you have to," he shouted. His weapons officer tried to comply, but before a single shot could be fired, every external weapon system exploded. Earth's ships had mapped every defensive installation during their 6-day observation period. Now they destroyed them with surgical precision. Plasma cannons, missile batteries, point defense systems, everything that could fight back was eliminated in under 90 seconds. The escape pods were next. Throck watched in horror as every single pod bay was hit. The pods themselves turned into useless scrap metal. His people were trapped. Whatever was attacking them didn't want anyone leaving. Then, for the first time since the attack began, Throck's personal communication panel activated. A human face appeared on the screen. The man wore an Earth military uniform and spoke through a translator, his words coming out in perfect Vorgoth. "Commander Throck, my name is Admiral Juno of the Earth Defense Fleet. I'm going to show you something, and I want you to watch it very carefully." The screen split and footage began playing. Throck saw Ambassador Minji making a presentation to the Galactic Council. He saw her evidence of Vorgoth crimes against the Pinari species. Then he saw the explosion that killed her and her entire delegation. Finally, he saw Ambassador Rylock's broadcast blaming the deaths on human incompetence. "We know what happened," Juno continued, his voice cold and hard. "We know your empire murdered our ambassador to silence her. We know your people tried to humiliate us in front of the entire galaxy. And now we're going to teach you a lesson that should have been obvious from the start." Throck's hands were shaking. Please, we have 300 people on this station. Most of them are just support staff, technicians, families. They had nothing to do with what happened on Nexus Prime. You're right, Juno said. They probably didn't. Just like Ambassador Minji's assistant Jaiwoo probably would have been happy to spend her life filing reports and organizing meetings. Just like Security Officer Taeyang just wanted to keep people safe. Just like the 8 other delegation members who died were mostly scientists and cultural liaisons who had never hurt anyone. But your empire killed them all anyway, didn't they? Throck had no response to that. He watched as Juno's expression hardened even further. Here's what's going to happen, Commander. I'm giving you 30 minutes to get every single person on your station into the central core section. That area has the strongest structural integrity and the best emergency life support. Move everyone there now. This is the only mercy Earth is offering today. The transmission ended. Throck stared at the blank screen for 5 seconds before his training kicked in. He activated the station-wide announcement system and ordered a complete evacuation to the core. His crew moved quickly despite their fear. They had 28 minutes. Captain Salmon watched the thermal imaging of the station, tracking the movement of life signs into the central core. She felt no satisfaction in what she was about to do, but she felt no hesitation either. War was ugly and someone had to carry out the ugly work. When the 30 minutes expired, Earth's ships opened fire with their main weapons. Kinetic projectiles accelerated to tremendous speeds slammed into the station's outer sections. Each impact was precisely calculated to cause maximum structural damage while leaving the core intact. The station began tearing itself apart, huge pieces of hull spinning off into space. Inside the core, Throck and his people huddled together as their world literally fell apart around them. The structural integrity fields held, but barely. The lights flickered. The gravity generators struggled to maintain stability. People were crying, praying, or just sitting in shocked silence. When the bombardment finally stopped, Commander Throck accessed what was left of his external sensors. His station, his home for 8 years, was gone. The only thing remaining was the core section, a tiny sphere of safety floating in a cloud of debris. Juno's face appeared on the screen again. This footage is being broadcast across every communication channel in the galaxy. Every species, every government, every news organization is watching right now. They're seeing what happens when you kill Earth's ambassadors. They're seeing what happens when you think humans are weak. Throck could see the tactical display now. 6 ships had appeared, dropping their stealth systems. They surrounded the core section with weapons still charged and ready. Your people will be retrieved by Vorgoth rescue ships in approximately 6 hours, Juno continued. We're not monsters, Commander. We don't murder helpless people. But we want everyone watching to understand something very clearly. Earth came to the Galactic Council in peace. We sent our best diplomat, a woman who had dedicated her entire life to finding peaceful solutions to conflicts. Your empire murdered her because she dared to speak the truth. The Admiral leaned forward, and his eyes seemed to bore through the screen. So here's Earth's message to the galaxy. We will not accept injustice. We will not stay silent when our people are murdered. And we will not be intimidated by anyone, no matter how powerful you think you are. This station was just the beginning. If the Vorgoth Empire wants war, Earth is ready to show them what war really looks like. The transmission ended, and the Earth ships vanished back into stealth mode, disappearing as completely as if they had never been there at all. Commander Throck sat in the darkness of his dying station, surrounded by terrified soldiers and civilians, and realized that everything had changed. The galaxy had dismissed humans as primitive and weak. That assessment had just been proven catastrophically wrong. And the Vorgoth Empire, proud and arrogant, would never let this insult stand unanswered. The Vorgoth response came exactly 8 days after the Kepler 442 attack. Their third fleet, comprising 217 warships, entered Earth's solar system with weapons charged and shields at maximum. Fleet Commander Valtor broadcast his intentions on open channels, wanting everyone in the galaxy to hear his words. The primitive species called humanity has committed an act of terrorism against the Vorgoth Empire. We come now to deliver justice and to remind these savages of their place in the galactic order. When we are finished, Earth will serve as an example to any other species that considers challenging our authority. It was a speech designed to humiliate before the killing even began. Valtor had crushed 7 rebellions across a dozen worlds during his long career. He had reduced entire civilizations to ash when they refused to submit to Vorgoth rule. These humans would be no different. They had gotten lucky once with a surprise attack against a soft target. Now they would face real military power and learn what hopelessness truly meant. Admiral Juno watched the Vorgoth fleets approach from the bridge of his flagship, the Indomitable, positioned near the Kuiper Belt. His fleet looked pathetic in comparison. 37 ships total, most of them smaller than the average Vorgoth cruiser. To any objective military analyst, this wasn't a battle. This was an execution. But Juno wasn't worried. He was actually smiling, which confused some of his younger officers. They had expected their admiral to show concern or at least tension. Instead, he looked like someone who had just been dealt a winning hand in a card game. "Let them come deeper into the system," Juno ordered calmly. "I want them fully committed before we show them what they're really facing." What Commander Valtor didn't understand, what none of the Vorgoth understood, was that humanity had been preparing for exactly this scenario since before they even made first contact with alien life. Every war Earth had ever fought, every tactical innovation, every strategic lesson learned from thousands of years of human conflict had been studied, catalogued, and incorporated into Earth's military doctrine. Humans didn't fight fair. Humans fought to win. The Vorgoth fleet moved through the asteroid belt in standard formation, their ships arranged in a pattern that had proven effective for 600 years of warfare. It was a formation designed to maximize firepower while maintaining defensive coverage. It was textbook perfect, which was exactly the problem. The Vorgoth fought by the textbook. Humans threw the textbook away. Juno gave the signal, and 37 Earth ships scattered in 37 different directions. There was no formation, no coordinated movement, nothing that made sense to traditional military thinking. The Vorgoth commanders actually laughed. These humans were panicking, breaking apart in confusion. This would be even easier than expected. Then the real attack began. Earth's ships didn't fight like ships. They fought like wolves hunting in a pack. 3 ships would suddenly converge on a single Vorgoth cruiser from different angles, each one firing a different weapon system. Before the target could adapt its shields, it was already taking critical damage. Then the Earth ships would vanish back into the asteroid field before the Vorgoth could coordinate a response. Captain Saman piloted her stealth ship directly through a debris field that the Vorgoth sensors marked as too dense for safe navigation. She came out behind a Vorgoth destroyer and fired a single shot from her railgun. The tungsten penetrator, accelerated to a significant fraction of light speed, punched through the destroyer's engine section like paper. The ship wasn't destroyed, but it was crippled and drifting, no longer a threat. Commander Valtor watched his tactical display with growing confusion. Ships were going offline faster than his crews could report damage. The human vessels were everywhere and nowhere, striking from impossible angles and then disappearing before counterfire could be coordinated. This wasn't how warfare was supposed to work. All ships, tight formation. Overlap shields and maintain constant point defense fire, he ordered. It was the right tactical decision given the circumstances, but it was exactly what Juno had been waiting for. When the Vorgoth ships clustered together, they became a single massive target instead of 200 separate threats. Earth's hidden weapons platforms, positioned throughout the asteroid belt over the past 6 days, activated for the first time. These weren't ships. They were autonomous weapon systems, each one carrying a payload that the Vorgoth had never encountered before. Kinetic kill vehicles accelerated by electromagnetic launchers to velocities that made conventional shields useless. The first wave of projectiles hit the tightly clustered Vorgoth formation like a hammer hitting eggs. Shields that could absorb energy weapons simply couldn't handle the kinetic impact. Ships crumpled, their hulls torn open by the sheer force of impact. Atmosphere vented into space. Life support systems failed. Emergency beacons began transmitting from dozens of stricken vessels. Break formation. Scatter. Valtor screamed into his communication system, but it was too late. The human ships emerged from the asteroid field in coordinated strikes now, targeting the ships that were trying to retreat. There was no mercy, no hesitation. Every shot was calculated to cripple or destroy. Lieutenant Hyun piloted her fighter through the chaos, her smaller ship darting between the massive Vorgoth cruisers. She targeted sensor arrays and communication relays, the eyes and ears of the fleet. Within minutes, Vorgoth ships were blind and deaf, unable to coordinate with each other or their command structure. Commander Valtor's flagship shuddered as it took multiple hits. Half his bridge crew was dead or unconscious. His shields were at 15% and dropping. Around him, his fleet was being systematically dismantled by an enemy that should have been overwhelmed in the first 5 minutes of combat. How? He whispered to himself. How is this possible? The answer was simple, though Valtor would never understand it. The Vorgoth had been the dominant military power for so long that they had stopped innovating. Their tactics hadn't changed in centuries because they hadn't needed to change. They fought the way they had always fought, and it had always worked. Humans had no such luxury. Every generation of humanity had faced new enemies, new challenges, new ways of dying. Humans had learned to adapt or perish. And what Earth's military had created over the past 40 years wasn't just advanced technology. It was a completely new philosophy of warfare based on one simple principle. Never fight the way your enemy expects. 6 hours into the battle, Commander Val Tor made the hardest decision of his military career. He ordered the retreat. Of the 217 ships that had entered Earth's solar system, only 43 were still combat capable. Another 70 were damaged but could limp away if given the chance. The rest were destroyed or drifting hulks with their crews either dead or hoping for rescue. The Vorgoth Third Fleet, which had crushed rebellions across multiple star systems, had been shattered by a force 1/6 its size. Admiral Juno watched them go and made a choice. He let them retreat. He could have pursued and destroyed every last ship, but that wasn't the point. The point was to send a message, and that message needed survivors to carry it back home. As the last Vorgoth ship jumped away, Juno opened a channel that he knew would be recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. His words were calm and measured, but they carried the weight of absolute certainty. To the Vorgoth Empire and to any other species watching, Earth did not want this war. We came in peace. We sent our best people to talk, to negotiate, to find common ground. You murdered them. You tried to humiliate us. You thought we were weak. Today you learned the cost of that mistake. He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. But understand this clearly. What happened here was not Earth at full strength. This was a defensive action with a fraction of our capabilities. If the Vorgoth Empire wants to continue this war, we will bring the full might of humanity to bear. We will show you what total war really means. The choice is yours. The transmission ended, and Juno sat back in his command chair. He felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Good people had died today on both sides. But sometimes the only way to prevent greater violence was to demonstrate overwhelming force against those who believed might made right. What Juno didn't know yet was that his message had done something unexpected. Across the galaxy, species that had been oppressed by the Vorgoth for generations had watched the battle. They had seen the impossible happen. The great Vorgoth fleet, thought to be invincible, had been broken by a species that had barely entered the galactic stage. And in the shadows of a dozen different worlds, resistance movements began to whisper a dangerous question. If humans could stand up to the Vorgoth, why couldn't we? The Vorgoth Grand Armada took 6 weeks to assemble. It was the largest military force the Empire had ever gathered in one place. 5,000 warships, pulled from every corner of Vorgoth territory, converging on a single target, Earth. The Empire's pride had been wounded, and wounded pride demands blood. Supreme Commander Krethos personally took command of the Armada. He was old enough to remember when the Vorgoth had conquered their first neighboring system, beginning their rise to galactic dominance. He had spent his entire life building and maintaining that dominance. He would not allow it to end because of some upstart species that barely knew how to leave their own planet. The message he sent to Earth was brief and brutal. Surrender now and your species will be allowed to survive as servants to the Empire. Resist, and we will turn your world into a monument to the cost of defying Vorgoth authority. You have 48 hours to decide. Admiral Juno read the message 3 times before responding. When he did, his answer was just as brief. Come and try. Those 48 hours were the busiest in human history. Every industrial facility on Earth, Mars, the Moon, and the orbital stations shifted to total war production. Factories that had made civilian goods yesterday were churning out weapons today. Mining operations in the asteroid belt worked around the clock. Everything humanity had built over centuries of space exploration was being transformed into instruments of survival. But Earth wasn't just building weapons. Juno had learned from the previous battle that raw firepower wasn't enough. The Vorgoth would adapt to the tactics that had worked before. So Earth needed to adapt faster. Engineering teams worked without sleep, developing new weapons systems, new defensive technologies, new ways to turn the solar system itself into a fortress. The Moon became a massive weapons platform, its surface covered with railgun batteries and missile silos. Mars hosted shield generators powerful enough to protect entire fleets. The asteroid belt was transformed into a minefield of autonomous defense drones, each one programmed to identify and engage Vorgoth ships. Every moon of Jupiter and Saturn had hidden weapon systems installed in caves and craters. Captain Salmon, promoted after her performance in the previous battle, supervised the deployment of Earth's most secret weapon, antimatter mines. Each mine contained enough antimatter to vaporize a ship the size of a Vorgoth battlecruiser. They floated invisibly in the space between planets, waiting with infinite patience. When the Vorgoth Grand Armada arrived, it was like watching a storm gather on the horizon. 5,000 ships darkened the space beyond Neptune, their formation so massive it could be seen with optical telescopes from Earth's surface. People looked up at the night sky and saw their potential doom hanging there like a second moon. Commander Krethos studied the system defenses and was impressed despite himself. The humans had been busy. But it didn't matter. He had 5,000 ships. They had faced and prepared for everything, but there was no preparing for being outnumbered 50-1. He gave the order to advance. The battle began at the outer system and worked its way inward over 3 weeks. The Vorgoth paid for every kilometer of space with ships and lives. Earth's automated defenses didn't care about survival or retreat. They fought until they were destroyed, each one taking at least one Vorgoth ship with it. The antimatter mines turned sections of space into temporary stars, consuming everything nearby in nuclear fire. But the Vorgoth kept coming. 5,000 ships meant they could absorb losses that would have broken any other force. They learned from each encounter, adapted their tactics, and pushed forward with relentless determination. By the end of the second week, they had fought their way to Mars' orbit. Earth itself was now within striking range. Admiral Juno stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, now positioned in high orbit above Earth. His fleet was down to 12 operational ships. They had fought brilliantly, but brilliance couldn't overcome these numbers. He was about to give the order to prepare Earth's surface defenses when his communication officer shouted something unexpected. "Admiral, we're receiving distress signals from Vorgoth rear positions. Multiple signals." Juno pulled up the tactical display and couldn't believe what he was seeing. The Vorgoth supply lines stretching back through the outer system were under attack. But not from Earth forces. From someone else. The Pinari species, whose persecution by the Vorgoth had been documented by Ambassador Minji, had launched strikes against Vorgoth logistics bases. Their fleet was small, but they were hitting supply depots and fuel stations, the lifelines that kept the massive armada functioning. And they weren't alone. Over the next 72 hours, 6 more species joined the attacks. The Kalani, who had been paying tribute to the Vorgoth for 200 years. The Drexen, whose home world had been occupied for 3 generations. The Torvash, the Menari, the Quillith. Species that had been oppressed for so long they had forgotten what freedom looked like. All of them striking at once, all of them targeting Vorgoth assets far from Earth. Commander Krethos received the reports with growing horror. His empire was under attack across a dozen systems. Rebellions were breaking out on worlds that had been pacified for centuries. His communication channels were flooded with requests for reinforcements, for support, for him to abandon Earth and return to defend the empire itself. On the 13th day of the siege, something even more remarkable happened. 3 species that were nominal Vorgoth allies declared their neutrality and sealed their borders, cutting off major supply routes. They didn't join the fight against the Vorgoth, but they made it clear they would no longer support empire expansion. The Galactic Council, which had stood by during Ambassador Minji's murder, suddenly found itself irrelevant. The old order was collapsing. Species were making their own choices, forming their own alliances, deciding their own futures. The system that had maintained stability for thousands of years was crumbling because one species had dared to say no. Krethos faced an impossible decision. He still had enough forces to potentially take Earth, but doing so would take weeks more of fighting. Weeks during which his empire would burn. He could win this battle and lose everything else. Or he could retreat, preserve his forces, and try to hold together what remained of Vorgoth authority. In the end, survival instinct won over pride. The Grand Armada withdrew, not in panic but in grim recognition of reality. They had come to punish Earth and instead had discovered that their grip on galactic power had been far more fragile than anyone realized. The day after the Vorgoth retreat, Admiral Juno received a communication from the Pinari government. They wanted to thank Earth for giving them courage. They wanted to propose an alliance. Within hours, similar messages came from the Kalani, the Drexen, and others. Species that had never worked together before were suddenly talking about cooperation, mutual defense, and shared governance. 6 months later, the new Galactic Coalition held its first assembly. 23 species attended, including Earth. There was no elevated seating, no hierarchy of ancient powers looking down on newcomers. Everyone sat as equals. The first order of business was establishing rules for conduct, with the first rule being simple. No member species could commit atrocities and hide behind bureaucracy. Admiral Juno attended as Earth's representative, though he made it clear he was a temporary placeholder until a proper diplomat could be appointed. On the second day of the assembly, he traveled to a small memorial station that had been built near where Nexus Prime once stood. The memorial was a simple structure, just a wall of polished stone floating in space. On it were carved the names of every being who had died in the struggle that led to this moment. Ambassador Minji's name was at the top, along with Jaiwu Taeyang and the rest of Earth's delegation. Juno placed his hand against Minji's name. The stone was cold under his palm. "You wanted to do this the right way," he said quietly. "You believed in talking and understanding and finding common ground. I'm sorry we couldn't give you the time to make that work." He paused, looking out at the ships from 23 different species docked nearby, their crews mingling and beginning the slow process of building trust. "But maybe this is still your victory, old friend. You died trying to speak truth to power. You refused to be silent about injustice even when it cost you everything. And now, because of that sacrifice, we have a chance to build something better. A galaxy where justice actually matters. Where the strong can't just crush the weak and walk away." Behind him, representatives from other species were arriving to pay their respects at the memorial. The Pinari ambassador, a fragile-looking being whose species had nearly been exterminated, stopped beside Juno. "Your ambassador saved my people," she said through her translator. "We were dying in silence and no one cared. She cared. She was going to speak for us when no one else would. We will never forget that." Juno nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Other representatives came forward, each with similar stories. Minji's investigation had uncovered more than just Vorgoth crimes. It had documented injustices across the galaxy, things she had planned to bring to light once Earth was established in the Council. As the ceremony continued, Juno realized something profound. Minji had set out to win Earth a seat at the galactic table through patient diplomacy. She had failed at that immediate goal, dying before she could complete her mission. But in dying and refusing to stay silent, she had sparked something far greater. She had inspired a revolution. She had shown oppressed species that speaking truth was worth the cost. She had proven that one person standing up for what was right could change everything. The galaxy would never be the same. The old powers had fallen or been diminished. New alliances were forming based on shared values rather than fear. It wasn't perfect and there would be more struggles ahead. But for the first time in thousands of years, there was hope for real change. Ambassador Minji had wanted to be a bridge between humanity and the stars. In the end, she had become something more. A reminder that some principles matter more than survival, and that fighting for those principles can transform the universe.